They called the F-117 Nighthawk Invincible, a legend born in secret hangars and proven over Baghdad. But on March 27, 1999, in the skies above Serbia, that legend was obliterated by an outdated missile and a patient enemy. The Pentagon's official account still leaves questions. How did a billion-dollar stealth jet fall to 1960s tech? What did NATO overlook? And why does the full story of the night America's invisible plane was shot down remain shrouded in silence? The answers reveal everything the world wasn't meant to know. Lockheed's Skunk Works team began with a question that seemed almost absurd. How do you make an airplane disappear from radar? In the late 1970s, the answer wasn't smooth curves or elegant lines, but a jagged, angular puzzle, each flat panel calculated to scatter radar energy in every direction except back to the enemy. The result was the F-117 Nighthawk, a machine defined by its faceted skin, where nearly 1,000 panels met at sharp, irregular angles. Nothing about it was aerodynamic in the traditional sense. The main wing edges swept back at exactly 67.5 degrees, a figure chosen not for speed but for the way it deflected radar waves. Side panels and the forward fuselage were set between 42 and 67 degrees, no two quite the same, all to keep the aircraft's radar cross-section as small as possible. Even the edges of the wings and tail were aligned in parallel, breaking up any predictable radar signature. This radical shape came straight from the equations of Soviet physicist Pyotr Ufimtsev, Ufimtsev, whose work on electromagnetic wave reflection had gone mostly unnoticed in the West until Lockheed's engineers put it to use. Ben Rich, director of Skunk Works, called it a flying diamond and admitted that the design sacrificed nearly everything for stealth. The Nighthawk was unstable in flight, requiring constant computer correction. It was slow, subsonic, and carried its bombs hidden inside to avoid betraying its position. Stealth wasn't just a matter of shape. The F-117's skin was coated in layers of radar-absorbent material, the so-called iron ball paint, a polyurethane loaded with microscopic spheres of carbonyl iron. This coating, applied in layers up to 2.5 millimeters thick, converted radar energy into heat. The process was painstaking. After each mission, ground crews inspected every inch for chips or scratches that could reflect a radar beam like a mirror. The chemistry was advanced for its time, but not exotic. No metamaterials, just careful layering of iron-filled polymers and dielectric overcoats. The system worked best against the higher frequency radars used by most Western air defense networks of the 1980s. When the F-117 reached initial operational capability in 1983, its existence was still a closely guarded secret. Engineers had created a jet that could slip through the densest radar networks, but only by accepting a host of compromises. The Nighthawk's faceted geometry and fragile stealth skin defined its strengths and, as later events would show, its hidden vulnerabilities. Night after night in early 1991, black triangles slipped undetected across the skies of Iraq. The F-117's first combat test came in Operation Desert Storm, where it was tasked with the riskiest missions, striking the heart of Baghdad's air defenses, command bunkers, and bridges, all protected by dense Soviet-built radar networks. While other jets dodged missile volleys and flak, Nighthawks flew straight to their targets. Over the course of 1,300 sorties, not a single F-117 was lost to enemy fire. This zero-loss record was splashed across news headlines and military briefings. The media called it the invisible jet, a plane that seemed untouchable, even when flying alone deep into hostile territory. For NATO planners, these numbers weren't just impressive. They rewrote the rules of air warfare. The F-117's success in Desert Storm turned it into a symbol of American technological dominance. Generals and analysts pointed to radar tracks, or rather the lack of them, as proof that the Nighthawk could go where no other aircraft dared. Its ability to evade the best Soviet radar systems became a core assumption in every new operation. When the Balkan crisis erupted, the same logic held. If the F-117 could slip past Iraq's vaunted defenses, surely it could do the same over Yugoslavia. With every successful mission, the myth of invincibility grew. Pilots were hand-picked, their missions classified, their accomplishments whispered in Pentagon corridors. The jet's angular silhouette appeared on magazine covers, always painted in shadow, reinforcing its untouchable reputation. Inside NATO command centers, confidence bordered on certainty. The Nighthawk was assigned the most sensitive targets: bridges over the Danube, government buildings in Belgrade, based on the belief that no missile battery, no matter how determined, could lay a finger on it. But as the campaign over Yugoslavia began, a pattern emerged. The F-117s flew at the same altitudes along the same corridors night after night. The very confidence the jet inspired shaped the way missions were planned and executed. In the minds of those directing the war, stealth had become a shield that could not fail. On the ground, however, Serbian crews watched and waited, studying the rhythm of these invisible strikes, searching for a way to break the spell. Zoltan Dani's battery operated in a world measured in seconds and meters, where survival depended on discipline more than firepower. Every member of the crew drilled the same routine until it became muscle memory. Radar on, count to 20, radar off, move. The S-125 system was never meant for this kind of agility. Soviet manuals described a static defense, but Dani rewrote the script. He cut the relocation cycle down to 90 minutes, half the standard time, by reducing the number of launchers active at any position and stripping the setup to essentials. Crews practiced breaking down their equipment in the dark, loading onto trucks, and vanishing before NATO could triangulate their position. Each move followed a pattern set by Dani himself. Never use the same route twice in a night, never linger in the open, and always keep a fallback site prepped and waiting. Emission control was sacred. The P-18 spoon rest radar, tuned for low frequencies, would sweep the sky for no more than 20 seconds at a time. That window was just long enough to catch a fleeting blip, never long enough for a harm missile to home in. Operators kept timers clipped to their uniforms, eyes fixed on the sweep, hands ready to kill the power at a shout. The battery's logs are filled with notations. 1907, radar on, 1907 and 20 seconds, radar off, 1908, begin teardown. Every man knew the cost of hesitation. Dani's insistence on precision was not just about evading missiles, it was about trust. Each operator depended on the others to stick to the count, to pack up quickly, to cover the withdrawal. Mistakes could mean the loss of the whole unit. Manual discipline extended beyond the radar. Visual spotters stood watch along likely approach paths, relaying reports by field phone. Camouflage nets and dummy emitters drew enemy attention away from the real battery. Dani rotated his crew in shifts, keeping them alert through long nights. He fostered a sense of shared mission, reminding them that their survival and the defense of their homeland rested on their ability to vanish before the enemy could strike back. The battery's cohesion and relentless drill turned a 1960s missile system into a ghost, always a step ahead of NATO's search. For Dani's men, the rhythm of radar bursts and midnight relocations defined their war. A contest of patience, nerves, and absolute faith in the routine. Each night, the Yugoslav crews watched for patterns, charting the invisible corridors that NATO's planners believed were safe. Dani's battery became a team of analysts as much as operators, collecting every scrap of intelligence that could help them predict the next move. Reports filtered in from human sources, villagers who heard the distant roar of engines, railway workers who noticed unusual activity, even sympathetic eyes near Aviano Air Base in Italy. These fragments were pieced together on worn paper maps, where each F-117 sighting and every NATO bombing run was logged by hand. Over 3 nights, a clear pattern emerged. The stealth jets always entered Serbian airspace at nearly the same point, flying a narrow route north of Belgrade, then turning east toward their targets. The same valleys and highways, the same bridges, the same timing. What was meant to be unpredictable had become routine. Danny's crew built a deception grid to exploit this. Decoy radars and dummy launchers were scattered across the countryside, luring NATO's anti-radiation missiles away from the real battery. Visual spotters, some perched in barns or hidden in hedgerows, relayed coded signals by field phone. Their calls, brief and precise, confirmed when a black triangle slipped overhead. Each report was plotted on a map, overlapping with the radar's faint blips. The result was a hand-drawn missile basket, a zone of sky where the F-117 was most likely to appear and where the S-125 Naval missiles would have the best chance of a kill. The battery's targeting process became a blend of science and intuition. Danny and his operators calculated the best firing angles, factoring in terrain, wind, and the known limitations of their equipment. They rehearsed the engagement sequence until every man could recite it from memory. When to power up the radar, when to switch to fire control mode, when to shut down and vanish. The maps grew crowded with lines and notations, arcs of possible approach, estimated times, fallback routes for after the launch. These were not the sterile grids of a NATO command center, but living documents updated with every new sighting and every adjustment in enemy behavior. As the pattern solidified, anticipation built. The crew knew that their window would be brief. The F-117 would appear for only seconds, and the battery would have to act before it disappeared again into the darkness. Every detail mattered. The timing of the radar burst, the placement of decoys, the coordination of spotters. The trap was set, but the moment to spring, it would require perfect execution and a willingness to risk everything on a single fleeting opportunity. On the night of March 27th, tension inside the S-125 fire control cabin was thick enough to taste. Lieutenant Colonel Zoltan Danny stood over his operators, eyes locked on the green glow of the radar scope. The P-18 had just handed off a faint target, barely a ripple, at 13 kilometers, right where the flight path crossed their hand-drawn kill zone. For a moment, nothing. Then a blip grew sharper, likely as the F-117's bomb bay doors opened, reflecting more energy than its angular skin could scatter. Fingers flew across the console. The SNR-125 radar snapped to life, its beams sweeping the sky for less than 20 seconds. Every man in the cabin counted down in their heads, knowing that a second too long could mean a harm missile screaming back at them. The lock-on came with a metallic click. The fire control officer called out the range, 13 kilometers, closing. Danny gave the order. 2 missiles roared off the rails in rapid succession, their exhaust lighting up the field outside. The guidance system fed corrections in real time, the radar painting the target for the full 12 seconds of the missile's flight. In those brief moments, the crew worked by instinct. One operator tracked the azimuth, another adjusted elevation, a third monitored signal strength. The cabin was silent except for clipped commands and the hum of equipment. 12 seconds after launch, the first missile passed behind the target. Proximity fuse, silent. The second detonated near the left wing. In the darkness, a flash marked the end of the F-117's myth. As debris tumbled from the sky, Danny's crew shut down the radar and began the practiced routine of tearing down equipment, ready to vanish into the night before NATO could pinpoint their position. Inside the cabin, hands trembled. Not from fear, but from the knowledge that, for once, the impossible had happened. Dale Zelko's world shrank to the roar of the ejection seat and the rush of freezing air at 8 kilometers above Serbian fields. The F-117 tumbled behind him, its myth broken, while he drifted into darkness, the parachute lines cutting into his shoulders. He hit the ground hard in a muddy field west of Belgrade, alone and deep behind enemy lines. Above, searchlights swept the night. In the distance, dogs barked and engines revved. Villagers and Yugoslav troops were already combing the area, drawn by the falling wreckage and the promise of a captured American pilot. Zelko moved quickly, stripping off his parachute and burying it under a hedgerow. He pressed himself flat in the cold earth, listening for any sign of movement. In his survival vest, the radio was his lifeline, but using it was a risk. He waited for the code word, sent in a burst transmission, and listened for the faint reply that would mean rescue was coming. The hours crawled by. Boots crunched nearby. Once a hunting dog sniffed so close he could smell its wet fur, but it moved on. Zelko crawled through fields and ditches, careful to leave no trail. Every sound, an engine backfiring, a distant shout, sent a spike of adrenaline through his body. He rehearsed his escape plan over and over, trusting in muscle memory and training drilled into him for years. As dawn neared, the distinctive white char of rotor blades cut through the silence. A combat search and rescue team, guided by encrypted signals and night vision goggles, threaded through enemy territory. Zelko popped a flare at the prearranged signal. The team swept in low, pulled him aboard, and vanished into the darkness before the searchers could react. He had spent 8 hours on the run, hunted and alone, but alive. The myth of invisibility was gone. What remained was a pilot's will to survive, a rescue team's precision, and the raw, human cost of a war fought in the shadows. Stealth, as engineered in the F-117, was always a compromise between invisibility and function. The aircraft's radar cross-section could shrink to the size of a marble if the jet flew straight, kept its bomb bay shut, and faced the right direction. But the moment those doors opened to release a weapon, flat metal panels swung into the radar beam, reflecting energy back like a mirror. For a few seconds, the Nighthawk's signature spiked from nearly invisible to something a 1960s radar could see. On the night of the shootdown, that fleeting window aligned perfectly with the Serbian radar burst. There was no radar warning receiver aboard to alert the pilot. The F-117's designers had left it out, believing stealth alone would keep the jet safe. In practice, this meant the pilot never knew he'd been painted by a missile battery until the explosion tore through the wing. The trade-offs that made the Nighthawk undetectable most of the time left it exposed in that critical moment. Within hours of the crash, the muddy field outside Bujanovci drew more than just local soldiers and villagers. Western intelligence reports later described Russian officials and technical teams arriving to examine the shattered remains of the F-117. Pieces of its carbon fiber skin, radar-absorbent coatings, and internal components were quietly collected and, by some accounts, passed into foreign hands. Chinese agents were rumored to have purchased fragments, eager to study the materials that once defined American air power. The United States weighed an airstrike to destroy the wreckage, but held back, citing the presence of civilians. Official statements downplayed the risk, calling the technology outdated, but behind closed doors, doctrine shifted. Stealth was no longer seen as a cloak of invincibility. By 2008, the F-117 was retired. In 2011, Dale Zelko and Zoltan Dani met face-to-face, sharing stories over coffee, two former adversaries now bound by a night that changed the meaning of invisible forever. On March 27, 1999, the F-117 Nighthawk, once considered untouchable, was brought down by a 1960s-era S-125 missile system, operated by a disciplined Yugoslav crew using tactics based on low-frequency radar and strict emission control. This event ended nearly a decade of flawless combat performance for the aircraft and shattered the myth of absolute stealth. The investigation found that predictable flight routes, brief radar exposures, and limitations in the Nighthawk's warning systems were all factors. While multiple sources confirm that foreign teams examined the crash site, the full extent of technology compromise remains classified, with key documents still unreleased. The US Air Force retired the F-117 in 2008, and NATO doctrine shifted to treat stealth as an advantage, never as invisibility. Today, the lesson is clear. Technical superiority can be countered by adaptation and patience. The night over Serbia proved that even the most advanced machines are not immune to human ingenuity.